If you're looking to get some booty gains, then you've come to the right place. What's up everyone? Brent Boland from BB Fitness here, and today I'm going to be going over what the most effective exercise is to build your glutes and break down the top 4 types of exercises that you should be doing and have included in your program to maximize overall glute development. Your butt muscles, also known as your glutes, are some of the strongest muscles in your body and play an essential role in both exercise and in everyday life. Whether you want to look like Kim Kardashian or you just want to avoid muscle imbalances and pain, having good glutes is both important for and look good on both men and women. With social media being so popular and accessible to everybody, taking a look into celebrities and fitness influencers' lives and having them post their bodies online for everyone to see can sometimes be misleading on how exactly they got those results. To better understand how this can be achieved naturally, let's take a look at a few different research papers that look at the most effective exercises for glute development. In the conversation of developing glutes, there are 2 main exercises that usually come to mind. That is both the squat and the hip thrust. So the first study that we're going to take a look at was done in 2015 by a man named Brent and a few other individuals. So Brent is known online as the glute guy. So this should be a reliable source of information. What they did for this study was they had 13 trained women perform a 10 rep max test for both the back squat and the hip thrust, and they used the electromyographic readers to see the muscle activity in the gluteus maximus, vastus lateralis, and biceps femoris muscles. Now, what the study found was that the mean activity level for the upper glute was 69.5% for the hip thrust and just 29.4% for the back squat. It also found that the mean activity level for the lower glute was 86.9% for the hip thrust and just 45.4% for the back squat. So if we base our reasoning off of this study, you would think that the hip thrust would be more effective at getting glute activation or building the glutes compared to the squat. But it's not just as simple as that, because yes, we can get an idea of muscle activity from putting electrodes on our body, but there's nothing to say that that muscle activity actually equates to muscle building or muscle hypertrophy. At the end of the study, it even states that longitudinal training studies are needed in order to determine if increased activation actually correlates to an increase in strength, hypertrophy, and performance. So that's where we get into our second study. So this study was done in 2020 by a man named Matthias Barbalo and a few other individuals, and it originates from the homeland of the booty, Brazil. So in this study, they took 22 well-trained women and they first assessed both the muscle thickness of the quad and the glute, as well as the 1 rep max for the hip thrust and the back squat. So the group of ladies was split into 2 groups, back squat and hip thrust, and they trained that exercise for 12 weeks. And what they found by the end of the 12 weeks was that both groups did significantly see an increase in muscle thickness and in hip thrust 1 rep max, but the results from the back squat were much more substantial. So what they found was that for the quadricep muscles, the back squat elicited a 12.2% increase in muscle thickness, whereas the hip thrust had an increase of 2% muscle thickness. And for the glute muscle, which is what we're really trying to look at here, there was an increase by 9.4% from the back squat in muscle thickness and just 3.7% muscle thickness increase with the hip thrust. So when we're looking at this study, we can see this a lot more clearly, that we truly did get that hypertrophy, that muscle growth from the back squat more so than the hip thrust. So if you're a little surprised or confused as to why this was the outcome, let's take a second and break down the anatomy of the glute muscles and the science behind muscle hypertrophy or building muscle. So there are 3 glute muscles, your gluteus maximus, gluteus medius, and gluteus minimus. And the muscle group originates along your sacrum as well as the crest or rim of your ilium, and it inserts onto the greater trochanter of your femur or the back portion of your leg, and it kind of connects as well into your IT band. Now, the actions of your glutes are hip extension, hip abduction, and hip external rotation. Keeping that in mind, let's now dive a bit into hypertrophy. So when we're looking at the human body, there's a specific principle that we need to keep in mind. And this principle is known as the SAID principle. So what that stands for is specific adaptations to imposed demands. So in other words, what this means is if building muscle or hypertrophy is the adaptation that we're looking to get, we need to put the right stressors or demands on the body in order to stimulate that adaptation to occur. So normally if you're doing a heavier weight for a lower amount of sets and reps, the adaptation is going to be more strength-based in the muscle. If you're doing more moderate to high reps with a more moderate weight, then you're going to get more of a muscle building or hypertrophy response. And if you're in the super high rep range where you're doing something for a very extended period of time, that's more of an endurance typed adaptation. So looking at hypertrophy specifically, there are three main things that contribute most to hypertrophy. So the first and probably the most important thing that needs to be present in order to stimulate hypertrophy is mechanical tension. So essentially what mechanical tension is you need to be creating tension in a muscle. And what happens is when you load a muscle with resistance, that resistance has to be met with an equal amount of force in order to move that resistance. And when we're doing an exercise, ideally we're doing that exercise through a full range of motion where there are different types of contractions or amounts of tension being created in order to perform that movement. And we're getting an extended amount of time where we are under tension or under load. And what we know about muscles and mechanical tension is that when we're in a fully stretched or lengthened position of a muscle, that is where there's the most mechanical tension or force required to overcome the resistance. So using a full range of motion and using a weight that is heavy enough in order to challenge you is very important for this to apply. Now, the second thing that greatly contributes to muscle hypertrophy is metabolic stress. So you can think of this as the buildup of lactic acid. So that's when the muscle gets tight, kind of sore, you're getting close to failure, you might not be able to do any more reps. So this is usually happening when you're in a higher rep range and you're getting closer to failure. This has also been shown to greatly stimulate hypertrophy. Now, the third and final thing that needs to be present in order to stimulate hypertrophy is muscle damage. So anytime that we are working out or using resistance, what we're doing is we're creating little micro tears in the muscle, and it then has to rebuild to get bigger and stronger. So what is known about muscle damage is when we're doing eccentric loading or eccentric training, where we're stretching a muscle under load, what happens is that is where the most of those little micro tears are created, and that's where you get the most soreness after the workout. So what this means again is that using a full range of motion for that muscle or for that exercise is very important to most effectively stimulate growth. So if we look at the comparison of the squat and the hip thrust, when we're doing a squat, what's happening is when we start at the top and we begin that descent, our pelvis is translating behind us posteriorly, and we are coming down into that trunk and hip flexion as we get to the bottom. So when we're at that 90 degree or below 90 degree position in the bottom of the squat, our glute muscle is in the greatest amount of stretch, and that's where we know the glute is most active in that exercise. So doing a full range of motion in a squat, if you're using a substantial amount of resistance, is going to develop those muscles quite a bit. But then if we look at something like a hip thrust, where the range of motion is very limited, we're keeping that glute almost in the shortened position, the most tension we're creating in that muscle is at the very top when we're holding that contraction. So we're not able to get that muscle into a greater stretch when compared to the squat. So there's no way that we can truly stress that muscle in the same way and get those same types of benefits. So now that we have a better understanding of these concepts and how this all comes into play with glute development, I'm going to be giving you the top 4 types of exercises that you should be doing or including in your program to maximize overall glute development. So the first type of exercise that you should be doing is a squat or lunge type of movement, and this is going to target mainly the lower fibers of the glutes as well as the quads. So this could be anything like a back squat with a barbell. It could be something like a walking lunge or rear foot elevated split squat. Now, if you're doing a lunge, just make sure that you don't have too long of a stride or too short of a stride, because then you're going to be getting more into the hamstrings with a longer stride or into the quads with a shorter stride. So being in the middle, you're going to get a little bit more glute. Now, the second type of exercise that you should be doing is a hinging or pulling type of movement. So similar to the squat, when we're doing a deadlift or a hip hinge, we're getting that posterior translation of the hip as well as that hip and trunk flexion. So we're loading up the glutes quite a bit in those positions. So doing something like a conventional deadlift or maybe a Romanian deadlift, either with a barbell or a dumbbell, or even a 45-degree hyperextension where you're front loaded and targeting more the glutes rather than the spinal erectors. So the third type of exercise that you should be doing is going to be a thrust or bridge type of exercise. This is going to help with overall glute development, build a bit more mind-muscle connection as well, and you could do anything like a regular barbell hip thrust, you could do a single leg hip thrust, or even a classic glute bridge. Now, the last type of exercise that you should be doing is a abduction type of exercise. So this is going to work mainly the upper outer sides of your glutes, and this could be anything like a seated hip abduction machine at the gym, or you could even get a resistance band or a hip band and do abduction walks or a wall sit with abductions, and that'll also be good for developing some hypertrophy in the glute medius muscle. So in order to summarize, to quite literally build well-rounded glutes, you should be including those 4 types of exercises: a squat / lunge type of exercise, a hinge / pull type of exercise, a thrust / bridge type of exercise, and some abduction type of exercise. If you don't feel confident enough with your squat or your deadlift, I would recommend doing all the other exercises that I listed for now while developing the skills that are required in order to perform those exercises more confidently with a substantial amount of resistance, because those 2 exercises will be the best for your glute development. Anyways, that's it for today, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I hope it was very informative for you. Please show your support by hitting that like button, leave me a comment and let me know what you want to see next, and make sure that you also subscribe so that I can catch you in my next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.